There we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the, May 25th meeting of the DEI and Metadata Networking Group. We have a short but interesting agenda. Rachel, where did we want to start?
You can start with the LGBTQ plus working group report.
Great. Yeah, so the LGBTQ plus working group chair is not able to attend, but I have been going to those meetings. And we are on the verge of I guess, being able to publish our findings, so not findings, but I guess our work. We've been, for the past number of months, going through subject headings related to LGBTQ plus issues between the Library of Congress, subject headings, Library of Congress, genre, form terms, and homosaurus, and creating kind of a composite, I guess, best practices spreadsheet as it looks right now. Which digs into some of the problematic terms that have been identified by other groups and by ourselves, and sort of gives a pathway towards a better representation. Some of the issues we've come across have been related to subtlety in language, and also kind of the fact that there is a big aspect of self-identification that is attached to a lot of LGBTQ plus terms. So something that may be considered archaic or offensive to certain folks is something that like another group will take as a point of pride. And so sort of how do we incorporate the idea of how do we reconcile these two issues, and so that's something that we explore a little bit in kind of the narrative portion of what we're putting together, which we're still editing. So I think it's a pretty good document so far. We're finding it, but hopefully within the next couple of months we will be able to share a more final version of it with y'all. But it's been a really neat group to work with. I'm actually really happy that with the work that they've done. I suppose that's all I've got in terms of an update. Without Rachel Newlin here for the details. I did miss our last meeting, which is sort of a shame.
Thanks, Scott. We can move on to the presentation on cataloging ethics in applying demographic group terms. Eric Willie and Angela Yan from the Illinois State University will be speaking on their work. They've published a couple of papers recently on the topic.
Okay. Can I share my screen?
Let me make sure you're able to. You should be able to now. There we go.
Is that good?
Yep, we see it.
Okay. Well, thank you to Rachel for inviting Eric and me to speak on our recent work in cataloging ethics and applying demographic group terms. And thank you all for being here today. This talk will discuss a generic workflow for adding demographic terms to records in the library catalog, with a focus on ethical considerations for each step. This workflow is adapted from a project to add demographic terms for African American authors using the Library of Congress demographic group terms, and a subsequent project to retroactively evaluate that work using the Cataloging Code of Ethics. We documented our work in the published articles Applying Library of Congress Demographic Group Characteristics for Creators in 2019, and using the Cataloging Code of Ethics principles for retrospective project analysis in 2021. I will start with just a brief background on the Library of Congress demographic group terms and the cataloging code of ethics. The Library of Congress began exploring a controlled vocabulary describing demographic groups in 2013. And in 2015, 387 initial terms were approved as LC demographic group terms, LCDGTs. This rose to 1,172 approved terms in 2018. As of this year, 2,126 terms exist in the vocabulary. This vocabulary is designed to describe the characteristics of the creators of and contributors to resources and the intended audiences of those resources. Creation of a controlled vocabulary for describing demographic groups immediately raises the question of how those terms can be added to catalog records accurately, efficiently, and ethically. Adding demographic group terms allows patrons to filter their search results based on these criteria. This is a record example of Trombone Shorty by Troy Andrews, with LCDGTs describing the characteristics of the creator, including the ethnic cultural demographic group term, African Americans. The Cataloging Code of Ethics was released in January 2021. It was the product of a multinational, multi-year effort by the Cataloging Ethics Steering Committee to create a useful framework for the discussion of cataloging ethics. Areas examined are authority work, classification, subject headings, and controlled vocabularies, access scope and infrastructure, staffing and working conditions, and resource discovery and access. The code includes 10 statements of ethical principles intended to aid the examination and formation of cataloging policy and practice to ensure that resources can be found and accessed by everyone. By reviewing a previous project with the Cataloging Code of Ethics principles in mind, Eric and I were able to see ways in which our practice met the criteria outlined in the statements of ethical principles, and ways in which our practice did not meet. This eventually led us to view the statements as less of a checklist and more as a series of prompts, which could be used to guide current and future practice in considering the impact of our cataloging and metadata work, both locally and more widely. Here are the workflow steps adapted from our project in applying an ethnic cultural demographic group term to describe the characteristics of a creator of a resource in the BIB record. We summarized the workflow to consist of 6 primary steps. Step 1, verify a need for adding a demographic group term, such as, is there a patron need? Talk to selectors and subject librarians to find out more information, and identify a collection or collections that would benefit from the term to aid discoverability. Step 2, evaluate controlled vocabularies and select one that suits your needs. Step 3, decide what level of evidence is required for using this term to describe the creator, either by self-identification, or if the majority experts agree, or contextual evidence, such as if a person went to an all-Black college in the 1920s. Step 4, consider available resources to do the work and its scope. How will you apply the terms? One-by-one record or batch loads? Is it for special projects and collections? Or retrospective titles already in the catalog? Or will it be an ongoing task for current and future titles added to the catalog? Step 5, find a source of expertise in relevant demographic and determine which authors are in this group in the collections, such as analysis of records by checking 650s, reference books, or verifying with subject experts and other stakeholders. Lastly, step 6, share your work. Eric will now speak on how the workflow fared under evaluation with the cataloging code of ethics principles.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting us to speak today. Yeah, we didn't just want to kind of reiterate our articles at you, so we thought it might be useful to go through the steps and mention what principles from the code of ethics we thought fit in each step best, although you might end up moving these around depending on your specific project and what you're looking to do. So for step one, that was verify a need for adding a demographic group term. And we looked at the ethical principle 1, which is to say we catalog resources with the end user in mind. And we were at ethical principle 10, where we work with our user communities to understand their needs. We didn't do this directly for our project. We asked our reference librarians. We wanted to do a paper on the LCDGT and asked if they had had any request for work specifically by members of certain demographic groups. And they told us that Black authors had been worked specifically by Black authors, and child composers had both been identified. At the time, we didn't have a music librarian, so without that in-house expertise in music, we didn't feel that child composers would be a choice. We didn't feel we had the necessary expertise to do child composers, is what I'm trying to say. So that is how we tried to satisfy these two ethical principles. And then in step 2, thank you. This is evaluate controlled vocabularies and select one that suits your needs. And we thought ethical principle 4 really applied here, where we're recognizing that interoperability and consistent application of standards help our users find materials, but we also recognize that all standards are biased, and we should approach them critically and advocate to make cataloging more inclusive. Frankly, we did not satisfy this for our project. The LCDGT was new, and we wanted to do some research into it and a paper on it. So we started with that controlled vocabulary, and there may have been a better one if we were approaching this purely as a project to add certain demographic group terms. And there are a lot of great controlled vocabularies where community members have contributed and had a lot of direct input that could help reduce bias and make the cataloging more inclusive. So if we could move the slide one more, please. Thank you. And then in step 3, you need to decide what level of evidence you'll need to include that term in your cataloging records. Ethical principle 2 shows up here. We commit to describing resources without discrimination while respecting the privacy and preferences of their associated agents. For our project, we had a university research grant and were able to hire a graduate student with expertise in research and African-American history. And Tremaine Mitchell, he was great. He looked for interviews in publicly available sources with people who might be Black authors to see if they self-identified as a member of that group. We felt that that probably satisfied the privacy requirements if they had identified as a Black author in a venue that they knew would be published and publicly available. But there's still concern there, especially for those who might have done that pre-internet. They might never have envisioned that interview being available and keyword searchable in the way that it is now. And throw in linked data where information can be collated much more efficiently and faster and easier than it was before. And that also becomes a concern, especially for certain groups where their being a member of a group might lead to personal danger for them, their families, etc., depending on where they are right now. Ethical principle 3 also has some relevance here. We acknowledge that we bring our biases to the workplace. Therefore, we strive to overcome personal, institutional, and societal prejudices. We were fortunate to be able to hire a subject expert here. We definitely did not feel comfortable deciding who would be a Black author just with our group in the library. So we were fortunate to hire Tremaine, who could bring that subject expertise in for us. And then if we could go to step 4, please. Thank you. Consider the available resources to do the work. Ethical principle 1, we catalog resources in our collections with the end user in mind again. And this gets important where you have to consider, is this going to be an ongoing project, or is it kind of a one and done deal? Are you doing it retrospectively? Are you just doing it for items in hand as they come across your desk? Because with faceted searching, if you're just doing it as items come across and someone sees, oh, we have 5 books by members of this group in the search results, they might assume that's all you have. The user might assume it's a complete list. And I admit I haven't looked recently. I haven't seen a lot of user studies into demographic group terms and catalog records to show that one way or another, but I did want to mention it. And then ethical principle 8, we insist on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace, promote education, training, equitable pay, and a fair work environment. As I said, we did receive a small grant to pay our researcher, and I think this is a very good example of how we came to view the principles as prompts to consider things rather than a yes or no checklist format. Because I would have loved to have hired Tremaine full time and paid benefits, but we weren't able to, but we were able to pay him the average hourly wage for a graduate student at our university. He was already receiving tuition remission, so we couldn't offer him that again. But so we were able to create a fairer work environment than asking for someone to just purely volunteer their time and not be compensated at all for their labor. But I would have loved to have done better as well. And with limited budgets, I feel like sometimes the best bad deal you can get might be where we end up. But we can keep advocating for more too. So if we could head to step 5, thank you. Step 5 is find source of expertise in the relevant demographic and determine which authors are in this group in the collection. So ethical principle 7, we collaborate widely to support the creation, distribution, maintenance, and enrichment of metadata. As I mentioned before, we received that grant and we're very fortunate in being able to hire Tremaine. We also discussed our project with Library of Congress members, especially Paul Frank and Janice Young, who were very generous with their time and expertise in helping guide us in the project and giving us background on the LCDGT. I know sometimes I can get a little impatient and I just want to do it rather than talk to people about it and build this, but it's a very complicated topic. And I think usually getting more points of view is going to lead to a more multifaceted, nuanced, and ultimately better project and work. So if we could head to 6, share your work. This we have 4 ethical principles here. 5, we support efforts to make standards and tools financially, intellectually, and technologically accessible. We take responsibility for our decisions, collaborate widely again, and we advocate for the value of cataloging work. So what we did specifically was we published our paper in Cataloging and Classification Quarterly. We presented our project at ALA and OCLC conferences. We had intended to include the citations Tremaine found in name authority record titles, but there was a discussion around what to include in PCC, in those records in PCC at the time, so we didn't end up doing that. And we did add the demographic terms to records in OCLC in the MARC 386 characteristics of creators field, and they should still be there. But our local records got ALMA'd during the migration, and for some of them, they used our record, which had that information, and for others, they used records from other institutions that might not have. And we have a list, but we haven't had time to go back through and re-add them yet. But I do think this is very important. It's a lot of work, and if you've done it and can share it, and someone else doesn't have to, that's tremendously helpful. It helps, I think, keep us accountable. If you're not willing to share your work, maybe ask why and think about that. There might be good reasons, but it can also give you those other points of view that help you and lead you to a better project. Yeah, I think, yeah. So in conclusion, we kind of want to stress that I think most of you probably know it's pretty easy to add demographic group terms carelessly and maybe even poorly, but being thoughtful and building those ethical considerations into your project from the beginning will result in a better and more impactful project for your patrons and the cataloging community and the members of that group. We have to remember them as well. They're being impacted by this work as well. And while some categories might be more difficult than others and take more thought and discussion, all of them should be approached thoughtfully and carefully. I think, is that our last slide? Yes. Thank you. We're happy to have any questions. We did prepare kind of a list of those steps with the principles we thought and applied most, but yeah, I'll stop talking now. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric and Angela. Are there any questions today? You can type questions in the chat if you'd like. I do have one question. I was wondering if you have any plans to use these demographic group terms as part of a diversity audit.
Angela, do you want to talk about that or should I take that one? Okay. We have an idea committee that does, we don't do collection development, and we also have the idea committee. They've been doing diversity audits. I don't know if they've specifically been using these though. That would be great for us to follow up with them on. And a definite use that we could show to admin for our cataloging work to advocate it. So yeah, thank you for the idea. I don't believe anyone has yet.
Looks like we don't have any further questions coming in.
All right. If you don't mind jumping around a little bit, one thing I didn't get to do with my panic at finding the correct Zoom account with this meeting was to pull up the actual draft documents that the LGBTQ+ working group was working on. I was able to do that in the time that I had while you were talking, though I was paying attention. But I just want to show them to you really quickly, just to give you an idea of what we are dealing with. So here, I'll show this. Move my Zoom stuff out of the way. This is sort of our draft. Again, these are drafts, so no screenshots and saying, "Oh, the group said this." But this is a draft of sort of one of the spreadsheet we're working on. So it's got two bits to it. It's got sort of a thing we're calling core terms, which is like what we've sort of selected as a useful vocabulary to choose from. It kind of distills the three different vocabularies, Homosaurus, LCGFT, and LCSH, into one resource in a useful, helpful way. And it also has identified terms. Homosaurus is very, very large, and it can be a little overwhelming. And this sort of picks the stuff that we feel would be most commonly used, most useful. And then the problem LCSH tab here is where we are sort of digging into some of the actual things that really require further discussion and more justification for why we're recommending one thing or another, or they're just a little more complex. So they're not prescriptive necessarily, but for example, gender nonconforming people, we have a number of like different ways to different headings that may be appropriate to supplement a bibliographic record that contains that subject heading. In other places where we're advocating for replacement of a term entirely when something is outdated. Another good example of something we're dealing with here is the terms coming out and outing, which are really have been used sort of too broadly as sometimes as like sort of a catch-all, but we are suggesting that when it comes to gender transition, transgendered folk, that maybe this term is not so appropriate as something more related to the experience of a transgendered person. So that's what we're looking at here. And the other part is sort of our narrative. And this part is pretty meaty. Let me just scroll down a bit. We've got 11 pages so far. Again, in draft form, but this is really diving into what we're doing, our guiding principles here, pretty straightforward. Then we dive into the concept of subject headings in the queer space. We go into some of the recommendations that for the terms that you just saw in that spreadsheet. This is sort of a narrative version of that, a little more digestible, just from a user standpoint. Some ideas about local practice. Again, this is not a prescriptive approach, so we're just sort of laying out options. We talk a little about the gender and sexuality SACO funnel, which some of the members of our group are involved with. We go into the actual authority record aspect of it, how to record gender in authority records, how to deal with name changes, especially related to gender transition, and then further recommendations, and then problematic Library of Congress terms. My favorite part here is at the end of this FAQ, where we sort of are taking specific situations, specific questions that folk might have regarding, approaching things in this space, and directing them in sort of the direction they'd want to go from the perspective of line staff and workers at different types of libraries and organizations. So it's pretty nice. Still refining, but just to give you a sense of this is kind of what our scope is, and we are also compiling some additional resources at the end here, and that has a little space to grow. So yes, thank you. I just wanted to add that and make sure that you all believed me that this group had done a lot of good work so far.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. Looks like it will be very helpful for those who aren't familiar with LGBTQ+ terms yet.
Yeah. So that's just about it for me.
Are there any questions that anyone wanted to discuss today that isn't on the agenda yet?
Someone just turned their camera on. I thought you were going to ask something.
I was thinking about it. I was curious. I know I had remembered you talking about the LGBTQ working group probably last year. I think at ILA, I went to one of the sessions, and I was curious if there's any other opportunities to be involved with that project. I know it's pretty far along at this point, but I was curious about that.
I don't think it's too late. I'm going to say, we're getting ready to publish, but the other aspect of this that I haven't fully thought through is like sort of the maintenance end of it.
Sure.
If these sit there on the internet for a year or 2 years, they're going to become outdated. And so we do need continued work on this in this project. So there definitely should be opportunity going forward to get involved. And honestly, we've lost a member of the group over time, maybe 2 members. I kind of forget due to attrition and people getting busy. So it's not too late to come in now. Even if you want to join our next meeting, I can let Rachel know that you want to be included in that email.
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to attend a meeting and just see if it's something that I can fit in to my workflow and responsibilities here. But I love the work that you're doing, so I'd love to be involved if I can be.
Okay. I'm going to put my email in the chat.
Okay, sure.
Just shoot me a message, and so I'll have your email, and I
Definitely.
can forward it on to Rachel.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah. If anyone is interested in being involved with other working groups, we have another working group on disabilities and accessibility that is working on their statement, and we also have one on Indigenous headings that is still getting underway. Feel free to email Scott or I and let us know if you're interested in volunteering.
Anything else? All right.
I think we can adjourn the meeting.
Great. Thanks, everyone. We will make this meeting recording available for people who couldn't make it shortly. So thanks again, and hopefully we'll see you soon.